That's the good stuff right here. Hard, soft literature. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of. I tell you what, I'll check it out. You know, I'm not normally one to destroy books, but I'm just kind of big for it. Hiya folks, Fruit and Doggy here to do another book discussion, and this time I am discussing The Many-Colored Land by Julian May. And this one is apparently volume 1 in a Pliocene Exile saga. And I only have the first book with me. And I'm just going to start things off by reading the summary of the book. It's pretty lengthy, to be honest. In the year 2034, Theo Guderian, a French physicist, made an amusing but impractical discovery: the means to use a one-way, fixed-focus time warp that opened into a place in the Rhone River Valley during the idyllic Pliocene epoch 6 million years ago. But as time went on, a certain usefulness developed. The misfits and mavericks of the future, many of them brilliant people, began to seek this exit door to mysterious past. In 2110, a particularly strange and interesting group was preparing to make the journey. Starship captain, a girl athlete, a paleontologist, a woman priest, and others who had reason to flee the technological perfection of 22nd century life. Thus begins this dazzling fantasy novel that invites comparisons with the work of J.R.R. Tolkien, Arthur Clarke, and Ursula Le Guin. Okay, I'm just going to skip that part. The group that passes through the time portal finds an unforeseen strangeness on the other side. Far from being uninhabited, Pliocene Europe is the home of two warring races from another planet. There is the knightly race of the Tanu, handsome, arrogant, and possessing vast powers of psychokinesis and telepathy. And there is the outcast race of Firvulag. 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 Not sure how to pronounce it exactly. Dwarvish, malevolent, and gifted with their own supernormal skills. Taken captive by the Tanu and transported through the primordial European landscape, the humans managed to break free, join in an uneasy alliance with the forest-dwelling Firvulag, and finally launched an attack against the Tanu city of light on the banks of a river that eons later would be called the Rhine. Myth and legend, wit and violence, speculative science, and breathtaking imagination mingle in this romantic fantasy, which is the first volume in a series about the Exile world. The sequel, titled The Golden Torque, will follow soon. Excuse me. And I haven't actually looked into this series to find out how many books there were, how it's been received. I just thought I'd discuss this one more or less blind after reading the introductory book to the series. But I will include probably the Amazon link in case you want to look into this series further for yourself. And excuse me, overall I would describe this as basically just a science fiction book, because what the summary doesn't forecast or discuss is that as they're traveling into the past, they are being given equipment and materials so that they aren't living off the land with in a completely rugged primordial way. They have a litany of equipment, resources, and materials at their disposal that they can use to tame the land, set up buildings, a wide variety of equipment and tools. So that is well beyond anything that would be Stone Age, even medieval periods. Again, it's very far developed technology. Some of it has like a built-in degrade time, but it still lasts a couple hundred years. That way it's not overly permanent. And as far as any possible time continuity issues, it basically just sort of ignores the problem because they're traveling so far in the past and there's not been any, theoretically there's been no disruptions to the time stream, so it's just assumed that at some point after the millions of years that have passed, that whatever human society existed at that time, no matter how advanced it was, somehow it degraded or broken down at some point. At least presumably. Which, if nothing else, you think would be somewhat of an inhibition that would prevent anybody from wanting to go through this expedition. A one-way trip into the distant past that could lead into, complete and utter disaster. Knowing that whatever civilization they're able to eke out is not going to last. That's just my interpretation. In this book, there's not really a clear protagonist. It's really more of a protagonist group. And it actually breaks up into two separate groups on the basis of basically psychic abilities. So in the far distant future, human beings develop psychic abilities, and there's basically different classes in different ways that it can be expressed. So somebody can be can manipulate, create visual hallucinations, create basically just hallucinations or illusions. That's the correct word I'm looking for. They can move themselves around. They can fly and take off and rocket away. They can manipulate others, mind control, so on and so forth. And I don't want to give away too much in my summary, but that is how the group ends up being divided as they wind up in the past. Is the group of people who have these abilities, they're separated, they're sent off to an area because their abilities are seen as very valuable, of course. And then the group that's basically just average, don't have those abilities, or they're very weak and faint, they're sent off somewhere else. But actually, the whole summary that I read out actually does indicate that at some point what they try to do is lead a revolt against the Tanu, and a climactic battle trying to fight against them. And this book, I should mention, published, I'm going to get the year wrong, I want to say 1981. Oh, went too far, sorry. Yep, 1981. And page length, it is just past 400 pages. 405, 410. Yeah, I'll say 410 pages. Excuse me. And this was a book that I had difficulty getting invested in. I think part of the problem is that it takes a while to build up its story, because there isn't a central protagonist. In theory, depending on your own background, your own personality and interest, you might find yourself relating or connecting to one or two characters specifically. But it focuses on, it has so many people that wind up kind of taking that role of protagonist, that it has to build up their background, their motivation, why they want to give up on the future and, try going backwards in the past into primordial society and give things a shake. And then the other problem is that since it does take that group and then breaks it in half, you have to keep bouncing back and forth between the two groups and what they're trying to accomplish. And I don't know, I just don't think that it was the best decision overall. It just split the focus far too much, and it's already kind of divided because there's not that central protagonist. And the other problem is that it was very clear fairly early on, before the halfway point, that this new group was I'll say very rebellious. They had very suspicious, very rebellious, no interest whatsoever in cooperating with the Tanu and trying to integrate into their society. They had no interest whatsoever, and it takes quite a long time for them to really get anywhere where they're actually getting to a place where they can lead a revolt, they can fight back. And then by the time it actually does get to that point, even though it involves 3 different races, the Furfulag, who have their own form of psychic powers, more of the illusion based, the Tanu, who are a little bit more direct, they have more of the mind control bases, and then the variety of humans. The combat, the grand battle, went by way too fast. It didn't take very many pages to get through it, even though it was, again, taking place from more than one perspective. And it did, after reading through all the rest of the book, it seemed kind of rushed. It seemed far too short, and it just didn't seem like a great payoff to finish the book that way, especially since this is suffering from classic first book out of a series syndrome. And what I mean by that is, hey, this is going to be a series, and so we're going to put in the hook, we're going to develop character setting, create a conflict, and have some climactic event, but no real sense of accomplishment takes place. I mean, it does to an extent, but it's so clear that it's only the beginning, that this is not resolved in any sense, that, again, it just felt a little hollow. It felt very incomplete. And if I were more invested, if I had been more drawn in, then maybe my appetite would have been whetted. I would have been hankering for more. But without a clear figure to kind of stand behind, to rally around, I just didn't get engaged that strongly. And I think there would be some possible criticism as far as whether all the characters are really that likable. I'm not really against them being more rebellious, but a decent number of them I felt were quite arrogant, especially since when you consider the fact that they are going backwards in time because they couldn't hack it in the future. They couldn't fit in. It just seemed weird to me that they'd be so egocentric to an extent. But that's perhaps just my interpretation. I don't know if, again, I've not looked at the rest of the series. I don't know if it gets more interesting, if they develop the characters better and make them more interesting, if the conflict builds up and it gets more exciting and grand. So I can't really recommend this. I wouldn't say it's, I mean, I hate to say it, burn it material. Again, it wasn't a terrible read. I wasn't rolling my eyes. I wasn't scoffing and absolutely feeling miserable as I read it, but I just didn't, it didn't click for me. And so when a book doesn't click for me unless it's doing something egregious, I just think that's a matter of personal preference. So I would say this might be a borrow book, and I'm trying to think of who might really find this engaging, and I'm really not sure, because my complaints, I feel like, are so general, and it's more about a writing style or writing problems. I don't know how I would recommend it to anybody in particular. Perhaps if you're really interested in society development, kind of that world building idea where taking kind of anachronisms, where you're taking sophisticated technology, then flying way back into the past, and then how do you build up a society from the ground up, even though they're having their cheats, their materials, their advanced technology, they still have to start from the ground up. Now this group doesn't. They're going backwards in time, and how to put it, the portal, I guess, slightly advances in time, and so people who have made this trip before them have gotten a head start. I guess I should have mentioned that earlier. That may not have been crystal clear, but yeah, the people who've made this jump before them, there is, excuse me, their work, excuse me, their work is already in place. And so, but still, again, that would still mean that they have to build off of that. That's still just the groundwork. And now that I've said that out loud, I never thought about this, but since, even though this is a time portal millions of years in the past, since there is some sense of time progression, because they're not falling on top of each other and they're not landing on top of each other and making a horrible blob monster of, you know, breaking apart the time space vortex because there's too many too much matter trying to go into one place and one time all at the same period. But does that mean that if you were to speed forward X million years in the future, that this time portal would take you back that far again? Like, is it like a parallel moving forward? So if you keep advancing, it's going to keep the portal going back is going to keep advancing. Again, I think that does point out that the whole time travel, time paradox issue wasn't incredibly thought out for the story. It had the idea and just didn't really think about all the repercussions. But because I'm really struggling to think of anybody aside from that who might really like this work, and not knowing whether the series does get better, not finding this one to be a great introduction, though I've certainly seen worse, I guess I'd go in that borderline borrow burn it area. I just think it could be done better. But anyways, that's just my opinion, and I hope you have a good one. See you later, folks.